Healthcare is a human right. Housing is a human right. Food is a human right. But if all of these things are human rights and must be provided by someone else, whose responsibility is it? Welcome to Escaping the Echo Chamber. I have recently, and one of the most prevalent statements I've seen come across on social media in conversation is that healthcare is a human right. And if you're saying that people have a right to choose their healthcare and not receive interference from the government, and not even receive interference from like other people, okay, that's I get it. But if you're saying that people have the right to have healthcare provided to them, regardless of whether or not they can pay for it, and regardless of not whether or not the actual person wants to provide those services, that's a huge problem. And I've talked to people and had these discussions, and people say, "Oh, what, you think people should die just because they're poor?" I'm like, no. I'm saying, question: if you think that people have a right to be provided healthcare, that it is mandatory that they receive healthcare, that means somebody has to be providing this healthcare. What if that person doesn't? Oh, well, what makes you think they won't? I didn't say they won't. What if they don't? Because you said it is a right. You said it's something that must be provided. So with that statement that it must be provided, what if somebody doesn't want to provide it? These words have meanings. And there are people who want to live in a fantasy land and pretend that there's no consequences and that they can wave a magic wand and everything will be better. That you can just pass a law and now everything's good. There's no downside. But somebody has to provide this healthcare that you think everybody is entitled to by virtue of breathing. If by virtue of breathing everybody is entitled to healthcare, what if there are an insufficient number of people to provide healthcare? What then? Does the government have the authority to then force people to become healthcare professionals? And how exactly would they go about enforcing it? See, these are things that you have to look at. But you're dealing with people who are dealing with emotion, and they're dealing with emotional appeals. And it's funny that I had a conversation with my brother who mentioned that, hey, I'm left brain and I'm analytical and I have to be able to deal with people on an emotional level. And this is an issue that does get to me on an emotional level because it's scary. It's scary thinking about the fact that so many people can just be oblivious to the effects of their actions and what they're actually asking for. Because if they go ahead and support something happening and government then deciding, okay, yes, we are going to make services that must be provided by others mandatory rights, must be mandatorily provided to you. So housing, that means somebody has to build your house. And if they don't want to, they will be forced to build your house. Now, tell me, when in the history of this country were people forced to provide their labor? This is something, this is the reason why it really, sets alarm bells off to me. Especially when you start talking about democratic socialism. Because, then, the majority chooses. The majority of people aren't going to choose. Well, the majority can make a decision that negatively impacts a minority. A minority. But progressives are selling lies. They're selling lies. They're pretending that there's no way anything can go south. It's like the monkey's paw. You make that wish. But all the time in the movies, you make that wish and there's some consequences. It's an allegory there. That we may want something. It may seem really good. But if we're not willing to stop and do the analysis of what's all entailed in that, what are the consequences? What are the next steps? what's going to happen, what are going to be the consequences and repercussions behind that, that's when you have unintended consequences. I know that these consequences aren't unforeseen because I'm listening to the words. I'm like, wait a minute. And I'm looking at how policies have played out in the past. Government's notorious for it. Oh, we're going to put some policy through. It's going to make everything better. And then 20, 30 years down the line, okay, we didn't intend for this to happen. We didn't, when we created these laws that put people in jail for crack at 100 times the 100 times the rate of cocaine, we didn't know it was going to result in mass incarceration. But wait, if you look at the congressional records, you'll see people were saying, hey, this is a bad idea. This is going to hurt people. Shut up. What do you know? We've got to be bold and courageous and progressive. We've got to be tough on crime. And they went ahead and did it. And it had consequences and repercussions. But the consequences and repercussions weren't felt by the people passing the laws. They were felt by the rest of us. Families were destroyed. Communities destroyed. Lives destroyed. And yet you have people who sit here and in complete judgment of others will call for policies that they have not given an iota of thought to what comes next, to what the consequences and repercussions of these actions are, because they want to pretend that they can just, a law happens and everything is fine. There's no downside. But I know better. It's a lot of us that know better. If you've been watching, if you've seen this one before, if you've seen this episode before, you know how this goes down. But there's a lot of people who don't want to because maybe they don't want to do the work. They don't want to do the math. They don't want to check their work. They just want a quick answer. Quick answers aren't always the best answers. But that's why I say, hey, it's just something to look at. It's something to seriously consider, the meaning of words. Because if you're saying you have a right to something somebody else must provide, you're saying you have a right to force that person to provide that thing for you. And that is an immoral position. As always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Comment below. And in fact, like I'm going to start saying, if you don't like what I've said, give me a thumbs down. But if you give me a thumbs down, comment below why. Tell me why. Don't just put a thumbs down and go run and hide. Be man or woman enough to stand behind your thumbs down and say why. And I will address it either in comments or in a future video. Thank you for checking out this episode of Escaping the Echo Chamber. I'll see you next time.